Okay, so today is December 2nd, 2020, and I'm Carolyn Weiniger here with my maternal grandma, Carol Peterson, and I'm just going to be asking her some questions about her history and her life starting at the beginning. So where were you born, Grandma?
I was born in Hayward, California.
Hayward, California. So what part of California is that?
It's in Alameda County, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area on the east side.
Okay, that's really cool. So, what do you remember from your childhood?
Well, the first memory I can remember was being at my aunt's home in Centerville, California. It was called Centerville at that time. And it was just during the war, it was kind of going pretty strong there. And my aunt lived near a fire station. And in the fire station was a big siren on top of the station. And they would practice air raid drills because we were near the Pacific Ocean. And I can remember being just little. I don't know how old I was, but I'll never forget my dad holding me because I was crying because of the noise from the siren for a practice of air drills. That was really scary.
That's unreal. So what war was this? This was World War II?
Yes, World War II.
Okay. Really interesting. So, what were some of the highlights of living in Hayward?
I lived in Fremont, or Centerville, and then years later it became five little towns that incorporated to make Fremont, California.
Okay.
Where I lived, we lived on 3 acres, and I was able to have a horse when I was 8. I loved horses, and I used to go to Fleischacker Zoo, and they had a pony ring there, and my parents would let me ride the ponies on the ring, and I would cry and cry and cry and cry if they tried to take me off. So then finally my dad, when I was about 8, he bought me a horse.
Wow, that's awesome. So did that horse live on your property?
Yes, we had 3 acres in Mission San Jose after we moved from Centerville to Mission San Jose.
So what was that horse named?
That horse was named Champ, and that name was after Gene Autry's horse, Champion.
Wow, that's awesome.
Who's a Palomino.
I love that. So how long did you have that horse for?
Oh, a long time, till I was 18 or so.
Okay, so your parents, what do you remember about them?
Well, my dad, he worked for the Southern Pacific Railroad in Oakland, California, at what they call the Oakland Mole, and that's where all the trains came together by the bay there, and he would repair the cars for further travel, make sure all the wheels were good and everything was taken care of. And it was passenger cars and freight cars. And the interesting thing about him working there, like I said, it was during the war that time, and he would sometimes he would find things in the cars that were left by the soldiers from the war. And so he brought home some blankets from the army and all kinds of stuff like that. It was real interesting. But he met all kinds of wonderful people while working there in Oakland, California, and we had lots of different types of people to our home for dinner. I learned early to love everyone. We had many African American or black families to our house for dinner, and they were just part of our family. We thought nothing of having Hispanics or people from other ethnic groups in our home, and so I got to have a real love for a diverse, many different types of people, and I appreciate that, and I'm so thankful that I was raised that way.
It's really wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So where were your parents from originally?
My dad was born in Fowler, Colorado, which is near Pueblo, which is kind of the southern eastern part of Colorado. And my mother was from Custer, South Dakota in the Black Hills.
Oh, wow. That's really awesome. So you know how they ended up in California? Was it for job opportunities?
Well, I think they met my aunt. My mother went to visit my aunt in Colorado, met my dad, and then they decided to, and then her sister moved to the Bay Area, and then they moved to the Bay Area.
Okay. Okay. That's really neat. And so what were your parents' names?
Theodore Anderson, S-E-N, and Charlotte Alice Forey Anderson.
Right. Okay. And so did your mom, what do you remember about her?
My mom was so talented in so many different areas. She could sew drapes. She would work in the yard. She would mow lawns, cut hedges, and she is the one that, with me, broke my horse when he was younger. Wow. I can remember her riding down the field and getting bucked off at the few times there, but we managed to break him. But she was very, very talented in many areas.
Yeah, she sounds tough like you.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went to school in California throughout all of your school?
I did. I went to elementary school in Centerville Elementary, and then I went to Washington High School there in Centerville. Graduated from Washington High, and then I started working. And at that time, not a lot of women went to college, sorry to say. So I started working in a doctor's office before I graduated from high school. It was a half-day program, kind of like what they have now. And then I went on from there to do a secretarial jobs.
Okay. Okay, so did you stay in California after you
Yes.
graduated high school?
Yes, My parents lived there. I was the only child. I have no siblings. And we lived in the house in Mission San Jose, and then I met your grandfather by started working at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory in Livermore, which was part of the University of California. And we met there. And then we purchased my parents' home there in Mission San Jose, and we lived there, and they moved to an apartment when they were older. And then we went from there in 1978. We moved here to Utah.
I want to hear a little bit more about how you and Grandpa met.
Well, I worked at the lab, Lawrence Livermore Lab, and so did he. But that was a secured laboratory, atomic weapons for peaceful applications. And so when you went to work there, you had to have a Q clearance, is what they called it. And it took about 3 months to get clearance to be able to go and work in the lab. So in the meantime, I worked in personnel where you did not have to have a Q clearance. So when I when I got my clearance in February, then they put me out into the laboratory, and I worked for engineering, an engineering project there, a gas buggy, and he was one of the engineers there, and that's how we met. I was working in the office, and I was doing his secretarial work.
Wow. That's really interesting. So did he asked you on a date?
Yes, he asked me to go to lunch.
Okay.
And so we went to lunch, and he was from Star Valley, Wyoming.
Right. Interesting. So, so did he meet your parents before you met his?
Oh, yes. His parents lived in Star Valley, Wyoming, and so I met them after we got married. We went to Yellowstone and Jackson, and then to Star Valley, and then Salt Lake City for our honeymoon, and that's where I met his parents.
Wow. That's really interesting. So you got married in California?
No, we got married in Sparks, Nevada.
Oh.
At the Bluebell Wedding Chapel.
Bluebell Wedding Chapel. That's awesome. And did you have a big crowd there?
No, just my girlfriend and her husband and us.
Oh, so just a little...
Yeah, and then we left from there for our honeymoon to Wyoming.
Wow. That's awesome. So you met his parents as his wife?
Yes. And they were so happy because he was older. He was like 27, and they were really happy that he was married.
Yeah. My grandpa's name is Max Peterson. He passed away a couple of summers ago. So it's really cool to hear more about your experience first meeting him and when you first got married. So you got married, and then how soon after did you have your first kid?
A year and a half later, I think it was about in January of '69. We got married in July of '67.
Okay, that's really cool. And so your first child was a girl.
Yes, Christy. Mm-hmm. She was born on January 1st, so she's a New Year's baby.
Yep. Okay. So, and had you talked about like how many kids you wanted to have?
Yeah, we did. We said probably 4.
Okay. And that's how it turned out.
Yeah.
4 kids.
Got to plan those things, you know.
Yep. Okay, so you had, where were you living at the time when you first started having kids?
In California, at my original home there in Mission San Jose.
Okay. And you had all of your kids there?
Yes. They all were born in Washington Township Hospital.
Washington Township Hospital. That's really neat. And so your parents lived nearby?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so all of your kids had the opportunity to meet your parents?
No, not my youngest.
Okay.
Well, they met their grandmother, but the youngest doesn't remember. But my dad was passed away when your mother was about 8 months old.
Okay. So your parents, they had you a little bit later in life.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so your third child, after you had one daughter and one son, was my mom, Marla. And do you have what was that experience like of having her, and do you have any stories from her?
Oh, it was fun. Marla was fun, and we found her name looking through a book of babies' names. And I had never really heard that name Marla, but we just fell in love with it. And then her middle name we named after Max's sister's name, which is different, Varie, so Marla Varie.
Wow, that's awesome. It is I love the name, but you don't really hear it a lot. So
No.
It's really
So a couple of things that she was famous for, I guess, when she was, like 2, she would go in the refrigerator and grab a cube of butter and run down the hall with the butter in her mouth as fast as she could run.
Right. Something we haven't talked about yet is you are now a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you have been for some decades now, but you weren't growing up.
No. I was baptized into the Presbyterian Church when I was about 8, I think. And my parents, we didn't go to church. I would go with a friend to church, but my parents didn't go.
Okay. So what about Max? Did he have any religious background?
Yes, he was from Star Valley, like I said, and most of the people in Star Valley were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In fact, his great-grandfather was one of the settlers that was sent to that area to settle Wyoming.
Oh, wow.
And so he grew up going to seminary, going to sacrament meeting, but his dad was not a member and would not let any of the kids be baptized because he was not treated very well in Star Valley because he was a non-member and people looked down on him, and he was the nicest, greatest guy you could ever have. And so he wouldn't allow them to be baptized. But all of them were baptized when they became adults.
Okay, wow. So when did you first come to know about the church?
When I was in grade school, I had a friend, Karen, and she was a member of the church. And I had never really heard about Mormon church until my friends started talking about it. And then I can remember when I got a little bit older, I remember when the first chapel was built, and I remember hearing the Mormon church, they're building a church here, and it was a big deal. It was a big deal. So,
Yeah.
And then later, in high school, now one of my dearest friends, she was a member of the church, and she was not really active, but she was active enough that got me interested. And although she never asked me to go with her, but when we got to be an adults and I was married, her mother had breast cancer, and I saw the faith and the strength that the mother had going through all of this, and that maybe made me become interested in why she had so much faith and why she was being treated so wonderfully by members, and she was having blessings and all these things that I wasn't familiar with. And so I got interested in it. And although my husband, who was kind of half and half, he didn't talk too much about the church. So when we had Christy, she was born with a hip dislocation and was having to have surgery. And I knew that Judy's dad had given blessings to people, and so I asked if he would mind coming and giving her a blessing, which he did. And I remember, though, it was so sad that I didn't realize that I could be in the room when he gave a blessing. So we stayed out of the room for some unknown reason, so I didn't hear the blessing. And so that was the beginning of me being interested more so. And then a few months later, we went to buy insurance, and the insurance agent asked the questions, like where have you lived and all those things to fill out applications. And Max had lived in Salt Lake City when he worked for the FAA. And so he asked, "Oh, are you Mormon?" And we said no. And so he had just joined the church 6 months prior. And so he sent the missionaries over to our house, and that's how we started with the lessons. But my husband, he knew all the answers, and so he was quite intimidating to the missionaries. I didn't know the answers. So it was kind of interesting, but Max said, he gave me some good advice. He said, if you become a Mormon, it's not just a Sunday church, it's a way of life. So it'll change your life forever. And so we decided to be baptized, and here we are.
Wow, that's awesome. And so when were you, so you already had a kid when you became members?
Christy, we had Christy.
Right. So did you then get sealed to her?
A year later, we went to the Oakland Temple, and we were sealed, and then she was sealed to us, yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing. So just to backtrack a little bit, how did Grandpa propose to you?
We were in a drive-in movie, and he proposed.
Really? Did he have the ring, or he just asked you?
No, he didn't have a ring.
He just said...
So then we got to go pick it out in Palo Alto. It was really fun.
That's awesome. Okay, so you took your family, once you'd had all your kids, you guys made the move from California to Utah.
Yes.
When about was that?
That was in 1978. We decided to raise our family here. I didn't have any family, obviously. I had my parents, I had my mother at that time, but we wanted to raise our children near his family. So we subscribed to the Deseret News to get the help wanted ads, right? And so we got the paper, and lo and behold, there was a job opening for the airport engineer for the new airport, wow, which is now the old airport, which has been demolished. But anyway, so he interviewed, he got the job, and we moved to Utah in 1978. And he was the Salt Lake City airport engineer for a year and a half, and then he was asked to be the Salt Lake City engineer with all the engineering for the whole city.
That's amazing. So Grandpa, he had studied engineering at the University of Wyoming.
Yes. He was a cowboy.
Cowboy engineer. Okay, so you moved to Utah, and what was that adjustment like? Was it hard?
Yes, I cried for two years because you've probably heard stories like this, but the church was different in Utah than it is in California. Right. So, you can see why it is different, but it was hard for me because I had no family, and my family was the ward in California, in Fremont. And when you're out in the mission field, the ward is your family. Yeah. So when we moved here, everybody has their family, which is wonderful, right? Yeah. But it was an adjustment for me. Right. But I love it, and I wouldn't move anywhere else.
Do you still keep in touch with anybody from the Fremont ward?
Yes, I do. And my friend Judy that got me interested, I still contact her. We talk at least once a month on the phone.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really good to hear. So looking back on all of these amazing life experiences and everything that you have gone through, what advice would you have to a young adult as like myself?
I would say take your time. The most important thing you'll do, the decision you'll make in your life, is who you'll marry. And so take your time about doing that. Just don't jump into anything. Make sure you know the person, you know their family, and you get to know someone pretty well before you make that decision. I think that's really, really important. And education is really important for women, especially, and men, of course. And get your education, get a vocation, something that you can fall back on if you have to. And I think those are two things that are pretty wise.
So you, once you lived in Utah, got involved a little bit later on with the foreign exchange student program. How did you get involved with that?
Well, like I said, I like diversity. I've always liked people of diverse cultures. And there was an ad in the paper saying, we need a host family for French girls. And so I said, let's do that. Although no one in my family spoke French, and Christy was in the high school. But my grandfather, Forey, was a French name, so I thought, well, why not find out about the French people? Yeah. So we applied. We got our first French student. And then next year, my daughter, Christy, went and visited her in France for a month. And then the next year, we got our first boy, and we went on and on and on. We hosted about 15, probably a total of about 30 people, students and chaperones. And in 1988, they asked if I would take care of the placements for the state of Utah. And I was interviewed, Max and I were both interviewed, and we got the job. And so we placed, like in the summer, maybe 250 students from Spain and France in homes here for 1 month stays. And that was the most wonderful experience we had, because we got to know the families in Utah, and we got to know the people from Spain and France, and saw them make some really, really good friendships. And I'm still talking to a lot of those kids, and they're now adults, and it was a great experience.
That's awesome. And I always really appreciate, you talked about how all of this was instilled in you from such a young age because of your dad and your parents, but I've always appreciated having such a great example, your great example in my life of just being so loving and accepting of all sorts of people. And your home is just, you always have your home open for whoever needs a good meal or good company, and always just been so welcoming.
We had a lot of fun in the summers with students and with teachers, and we just opened our home up. People would say, how can you have a stranger in your house for a month? And I said, guess what? When they walk in the door, they're no more a stranger. They're part of our family. So we made a lot of friends, got to learn about cultures, and they learned about us. So it was great.
Okay. Thank you so much, Grandma, for talking to me tonight. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate your willingness to share and reflect on your life. And it means a lot. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's been kind of fun to think back and remember all the good things.
Yes.
Thank you, Caroline.